Okay, so welcome everyone to the CAIS YouTube channel. We are sitting down today with Craig Van Slyke for an AE Spotlight. Craig is the winner of the 2023 Best AE Award for CAIS, and we're here to get some insights into the role of the AE and the experience of the AE. So, Craig, would you start us off just simply by talking a little bit about how long you've been an associate editor?
So I've been an associate editor for the Journal of Information Systems Education and for Information Resources Management Journal for 20 years or so. But I've only been an associate editor for communications of the AIS for about 5 years. Frankly, I don't remember exactly when I started, but I think 5 years is pretty close.
Okay, so 20 years of general associate editor experience, and then 5 years at CAIS. So in that time, either in the 5 years at CAIS or the 20 years, how has the role of the associate editor changed? Has it stayed the same? Would you talk a little bit about your observations of the evolution of the role?
Sure. So the workload kind of ebbs and flows. I think it's probably increased over those 20 years, primarily because there are so many more journal articles being submitted these days. In my 5 years at CAIS, I think it stayed about the same, maybe even gone down a little bit because I know the current and former editors-in-chief have worked pretty hard to try to expand the number of AEs, which has been much appreciated by those of us who have been around for a little while, because it does mean we have to handle less or fewer papers. I think the expectations have mostly remained the same, but what I've seen, particularly with CAIS, is a shift from a gatekeeper mindset to a developmental mindset. So it's not so much about how can we keep bad papers out. We still do that, of course. And I'm using bad in a very soft way here. I don't mean that they're bad papers, but maybe inappropriate papers would be a better way to put it. But there's been a shift towards thinking about, is there some way you can take this paper and turn it into something that makes a positive contribution to the literature and that meets the standards of the journal? Fred Niederman in particular seems to have made a big shift towards that mindset with communications of the AIS. So the first thought in my mind is not, is this paper good enough? It's, is this paper good enough, or can it be made to be good enough to merit publication in a good journal like CAIS? I think that's a huge shift. And I think that's an important shift that based on my experience as an author, I think that shift is pretty widespread these days. There's much more emphasis on development than there used to be, which is a great thing.
And I think too that that shift to development casts a much wider net in terms of the authors that we can serve and the ideas that we can put out there and circulate. Right. And I think that benefits everybody. And I think AEs play such a critical role in terms of that. So what do you see in terms of looking to the future then? You think about, okay, what do you project? How do you think, is AI going to take over the role of the associate editor? What do you see as the future of the role, Craig?
I would love to see AI take over some aspects of editorial and review work. It's kind of boring to do some of the things that we do, checking to make sure all the references are in the reference list. Are these things consistent from one part of the paper to the other in the minutia? And I'd love to see AI take over as sort of a super Grammarly that can check all of those things for us. Because, I don't know, maybe other AEs feel differently, but that's boring. What I want to do is be able to offload that work and really focus on that developmental aspect of it. You're probably going to get tired of hearing me say that particular word before we're done, but I really do believe that AEs can improve our field if they are more developmental. That also, that developmental mindset also really taps into what more senior scholars who tend to serve as AEs are good at. We're good at figuring out how to tease the value out of scholarly work. And I think that's what maybe AI can free us up from a little bit is some of the, that really boring, it's probably not the most academic word, but it's the most descriptive word, that boring work that just has to be done. I also see AEs as being synthesizers. So it's not unusual to have reviewers have very different views of a paper. And so an AE is not just a vote counter. An AE needs to be the person that brings those different reviews and those different perspectives together and helps the author make sense out of them. So it's, reviewer A said this, reviewer B said that, reviewer C said something else. Here's how I suggest that you move forward, making sense out of the totality of those reviews, not just each individual review as its own thing. Hope that made sense.
Yes, very much, Craig. And I think that it speaks to the labor of serving as an associate editor. At the very least, there's a lot of reading you have to do.
Yeah.
It takes a
lot of what you have to do. You get hit with it worse than we do, I know.
That's right. So talk about this. What about the best part of serving as an associate editor, Craig? It's a distinguished role, and it's a privileged role, and the journal just simply would not function without associate editors. So what is the good part about it?
So to me, there are two best parts that I hold equally in terms of their value to me personally. It's extremely rewarding to help authors get their ideas and their contributions in shape so that they can get their work published and influence the field. It's really hard to do that. And especially for authors who may not be at more research-focused institutions, maybe they're one of a few in information systems in their school, or maybe they're one of the few researchers in their school. And that describes a lot of our field. We tend to think of the field as being the big Research One schools and the doctorate granting schools, but that's not the majority. The majority of our field is people that are working away in smaller schools, teaching 3 or 4, sometimes 5 classes a term. And it's hard to do research when you're in an environment like that. And so I'm lucky enough to where I can walk down the hall and ask somebody, hey, what do you think about this problem I'm having with this paper? A lot of my colleagues are not so fortunate. And so being able to be that person who can help them get their ideas in shape and learn how to express them well and plug the holes that they might have in their research so that they do have a rewarding experience, I think that's huge. One of my favorite things about being an AE. I also like seeing new ideas. So one of the big advantages of reviewing or being an associate editor is you get to see ideas before they're out in the general public. Now, you have to be careful about how you use those ideas, but just being that plugged in is very rewarding for me, intellectually, especially.
It's a very unique perspective to see the work before it's coming through the pipeline. It's
Right.
Gives you a snapshot of where research is at various degrees that you just don't get by reading published research. So I think that's really fascinating.
Well, and if I could add to anybody who out there who is considering being an AE or a reviewer, it also gives you some insights on what not to do. So you develop this keen eye for problems, which can be very valuable in your own work. I always try to review my own work as if I were a reviewer or an AE. And sometimes that's a little bit depressing, but but it's always valuable. It's better to get some of those problems out of the way before you send it in than after. You'll get more problems pointed out when you send it in, but it's always good to get some of them out of the way up front.
What's the most challenging, the most difficult part of being an AE?
It's really twofold, and they're related. It's always hard to recommend that a paper be declined. You know that the authors have put their heart and soul and labor, blood, sweat, tears, however you want to say it, into the paper over sometimes very long periods of time. It can be several years to get a paper in shape to submit it to a high quality journal like CAIS. And settling on, I just don't see a path forward for this paper is just an incredibly difficult message to send out to somebody, but it has to be done to maintain the quality of the journal. Somebody's got to do it, and it's part of the job, but it's always tough. The other thing that this is going to sound maybe a little bit harsh, but I really don't like getting really bad papers. What sets me on edge as a reviewer or as an AE is when it looks like the authors haven't done their work, when it's sloppy. If I see one missing reference or something like that, one or two, that can happen to anybody. That doesn't bother me too much. But when I see reference after reference after reference that's missing, if I see indications of sloppy work, that just puts me in a negative mindset towards the paper, because it creates more work for the reviewers and the AE that's unnecessary. I don't want to have to spend my time figuring that sort of thing out. And so for the authors who are out there listening to this, do your work. Take the time to run it through a grammar checker. Take the time to double check that all of your references are in order. And I don't care about the formatting of the references and that sort of thing. That's not what I'm interested in looking at. But I can't tell you how many times I've been reading through a paper and I hit some reference that's fundamental to what they're trying to do, and then it's not on the reference list. It's like, well, come on. This is not some obscure thing. This is part of what your work is. And it just makes me not trust the other work. So don't do that, because that's really, really irritating to the reviewers and to the associate editors.
And I think too, that's a great point, Craig. And it's easy to forget as authors that associate editors and reviewers work entirely on a voluntary basis, and therefore, as volunteers, I think need to be catered to a little bit, and that makes the whole process work for everybody better.
Right.
So that's
it is not a paid gig.
Right.
And really, to be really blunt, you may want to cut this part. If I do one paper or I do 20 papers, it's the same line on my CV and it's the same line in my annual report. So it really is, I think AEs and reviewers view it as a personal responsibility to the field as much as anything else. So don't make the work harder. It will not go well for you as an author if you do.
Yeah, that's a great point, Craig. And I think that the point that you're making is that it's not like it's a cumulative career payoff. You get one line and then you do it for many years, but you don't get more lines for that. Like it's really a labor of service,
right,
to the community.
It's work that has to be done, and I'll tell you, we all need to step up and do our share of it.
What advice do you have? There's a lot of people who are becoming AEs for the first time, new associate editors at every journal, not just CAIS, but many journals. What advice do you have for new AEs? What would you tell a new AE to really help them advance quickly and become better professional associate editors?
There are a number of things. First, everything takes longer in the beginning. You will absolutely get better at it as you do it, like most things. So don't be really daunted if you're a little bit overwhelmed early on, because that will get better over time. You also shouldn't be afraid to turn down an assignment if you don't have time to do it. You know, it's better to turn it down than it is to do it poorly or to put it off forever. Most of us have stories about papers that sat forever and ever and ever, and you don't want to be an AE who's doing that. Also, take a coach mindset, that developmental mindset that I mentioned earlier. And I know I'm, harping on the same thing over and over, but don't try to find reasons to reject a paper. Try to find ways to accept a paper eventually. Now, you also need to develop kind of your instinct about whether or not a paper can be put into shape. And that's really tough to do at the beginning. CAIS generally has this, at least I think it's got this philosophy that if you can't handle the revision with one major revision, then we probably shouldn't move it forward. And that's a tough judgment to make. But it's one that you have to make as an AE. I mean, ultimately it's the editor-in-chief's decision, but they're going to lean pretty heavy on you to try to make that determination. So that means when you get the reports, generally we get a report that shows what the editor-in-chief has decided. Go through and take a look at that and make sure that there aren't maybe some things that you could be doing a little bit better. So it takes time. It takes practice. I would also say spend a fair amount of time building your network so you can tap reviewers. The number one most frustrating thing about being an AE is finding reviewers. And if you're a reviewer, for the love of God, please just either accept or decline. It's really easy with CAIS. It's kind of one click, either accept or decline. And what's terrible is when somebody's out there in limbo. I can't tell you how many times some reviewer invitation has gone unanswered, and I line up another reviewer, which is not easy. And then somebody says, okay, I'll do it. So now I have more reviews than I really need, which is not a bad thing if there was an unending supply of reviewers, but there isn't. So now I've tapped somebody that I could have saved for another paper. So really we all get these kind of random review requests from journals we've never heard of. I always take the time to at least decline. So, just be kind, decline if you can't do it. So yeah, I think that's really the advice I would have for new AEs. One more quick thing. Pay attention to your workflow and see if there aren't ways you can build routines and, text snippets or something you can copy and paste in, kind of develop your style of doing it. And that'll make you more efficient. I mean, I can tell my reviews and my AE reports by the way I write the first paragraph. It's always the same style, and it's just easier that way. So yeah, try to find ways to improve your workflow, and it'll really pay off, especially if you're good and you get tapped more.
Craig, that is excellent advice to end on. What a wonderful interview. Thank you so much for your service to the journal, to association, and thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it. Craig Van Slyke, Associate Editor, CAIS, winner of 2023 Best CAIS AE. So thank you, Craig.
All right. Thanks, David. Appreciate it.